everyone hear me? Can everyone hear me? This thing on? Yes? Good. Okay, we're going to get started here. If everyone can take their seats, it'd be great. I'll give everybody a minute to find a seat. No shortage. All right, good afternoon, everyone. How are y'all doing? Oh, I like the vibe already. This is good. This is good. I'm Crystal Paul. I'm the State Investigations Editor with the Illinois Answers Project. If at any point you can't hear me or I talk too fast, let me know and just give me one of these. But yeah, it's so wonderful to see so many people here today for our panel, which is Defining Impact, a conversation on change and resilience in journalism. So I'm excited to help kick off our 2025 Beyond the Byline program with this small but mighty panel. We have 3 local experts who will share and explore how their newsrooms measure influence and impact when challenging systemic issues that are deeply embedded in our societal codes and government. Our panelists will talk today about conventional metrics and impacts and how they are informed by and are shifting as the realities of journalism shift and change. On our panel today, I'm going to keep this nice and short. Nobody needs too much time here, right, from me. I'm not doing anything interesting. So on our panel today, we have our moderator, Mackenzie Warren. That's him. Mackenzie Warren is the director of Medill Local News Accelerator. He specializes in transforming organizations through research and insights, content strategy, business strategy, new product development, and executive leadership development. He's busy. Mackenzie's career has been about local news from the start. He got his start a couple hours from here in Rockford before working in reporting and editing and executive roles at newspapers in Ohio, California, Florida, Maryland, and Virginia. He is a mission-driven person whose life work is to lift people, families, and communities to fulfill their highest promise. And it's very important, his favorite color is blue. I'm here to deliver the good information, guys. All right, and our 2 panelists are Jamie Kalven. Jamie is writer and founder of the Invisible Institute. He is author of Working with Available Light, A Family's World After Violence, and editor of A Worthy Tradition, Freedom of Speech in America, by his dad, Harry Kalven Jr. Jamie has reported extensively on patterns of police abuse and impunity. He was the plaintiff in Kalven versus Chicago, where the Illinois Appellate Court ruled that documents bearing on allegations of police misconduct are public information. Jamie's reporting first brought the police shooting of Laquan McDonald to public attention, and he co-produced 16 Shots, an Emmy Award-winning documentary on the Laquan McDonald case. Furthermore, the film Incident, based on Kalven's reporting, was nominated for a 2025 Academy Award. His favorite color is also blue. And finally, we have Ruby Bailey, my boss. Ruby Bailey is the editor-in-chief at Illinois Answers Project. Her 3 decades of journalism experience include leadership roles at USA Today, the Indianapolis Star, the Sacramento Bee, and the Detroit Free Press. Before joining the editing ranks, Bailey won awards for business and enterprise reporting. This is a very extensive resume. This is going to take a while. She was an endowed chair at the Journalism School of the University of Missouri Columbia and executive editor of the first Black female executive editor of the Columbia Missourian in its more than 100-year history. We can take a pause for that. Mm-hmm. She was an investigative reporter for 7 years, and her reporting tenure includes 7 years as a Washington bureau and national correspondent for the Detroit Free Press, as well as an investigative reporter, during which time she embedded with the U.S. Navy during Operation Iraqi Freedom, covered Timothy McVeigh's execution, Columbine, Hurricane Katrina, and many enterprising stories, one of which she was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. But I'm going to let her tell you all about that. I have questions later. Her favorite color is black. And yeah, I'm going to let them take it away. Thank you all for letting me waste your time. No, I'm kidding. All right.
Delightful. Crystal, thank you so much. And you haven't wasted our time. You've gotten us started. Thank you. Before we do get going, a couple of programming notes. One thing is I heard from our friend Ryan that the elevators ding. And so I would just ask us to all press on, even though we're going to be hearing it a lot. The other thing is our star reporter back here, Grace Hawk, is carrying around the microphone. And if there are questions that you have, we're not going to wait till the end for you to get a chance to have a question or make a remark. So if the spirit moves you, please get my attention or get Grace's, and we would love to hear from you. All right, what a resume these two have. And we're here to talk about the impact of their amazing work. And we heard a lot about Pulitzer Prizes and Academy Awards and Emmy Awards and a lot of plaudits. But I know that, let's just start there. It's award season right now, but both of you have remarked in different ways how that's not really any measure of impact, and it's not what you're shooting for. And I know we're at a awards night tonight, and that's great. It comes with great work, but that is more the byproduct than the goal. And maybe you could say a little bit about that, Ruby, to start out.
Certainly. So obviously, we like awards. We took 5 in the Lizagores last week, so we certainly do appreciate them. They are an internal and external measure from our colleagues that we value, right? Certainly. But they are not the only measure of impact. And so for me, it is a more robust look at exactly how we benefit and how our work benefits the communities that we serve.
Jamie, you've talked about awards are nice, but they're not what's driving you, and it's not what's driving the Invisible Institute. Maybe they do play a role in gathering steam, attracting the interest of funders or other supporters. So what role do awards play?
Yeah, well, certainly awards are personally gratifying, and on this occasion we should be acknowledging that. I think that you can distinguish between the importance of awards for an organization. It's a kind, especially for an insurgent, small startup, it becomes a kind of important validation. Apart from the personal gratification, I think part of the danger of awards, I speak for myself, is you might come to imagine that you're good at something, when actually to be good at something means getting up every day sort of restlessly frustrated with the way your work falls short. So I think the danger is you believe your press clippings.
Yeah, sure. All right, now let's, if we read the first page of our program tonight, I think there's a telling quote here from Richard Dreyhouse, where he says, he's talking about how the fortune that he was able to build and how he's been able to turn that into making philanthropic gifts to support causes that he supported, that he valued. He said, however, the measure of one's personal holdings is of less importance than the impact of our collective aspirations made real, and we'll come to that theme here a little while longer. I've further come to understand that maximizing the impact of donated dollars can be considerably more challenging than earning those dollars in the first place. So let's get into what he might have meant by that and how you interpret that. We know, Ruby, for example, that there are some long-held readership metrics that get used, or listenership or viewership, and they can be calculated and put on a spreadsheet and shown to grow or plateau or not. And what role in your career and now at the BGA have some of those metrics of audience size played in your definition of impact?
So for us at the BGA, I feel as though we have more than one audience. We have the audience who's very familiar with our work, and we have the audiences who we are trying to grow, the people within the communities that we're trying to reach and trying to serve. So some of those metrics fall a little short if an audience doesn't know who you are. So some of the numbers on, whether it's on story, the number of clicks in the audience, the number of clicks on a story. But I will say also, one of the ones that I do look at a lot and that I do so appreciate from the audience are the folks who stayed with that story for however long. So someone who's read a story and they've stuck with it for 3 or 4 minutes, it says a lot. it was impactful in a way for them. That for me is some sort of an impact, that they didn't just click on and bounce off, right? So that engagement rate for me is really impactful. But if we're writing a story and I'm centering it on a potential solution or even exposing a problem, if the people who in the community who were most impacted by that thing, by that issue, are not better informed and better able to advocate for themselves, then the impact for me is lessened.
Jamie, you're nodding your head, and this seems like something you've thought a lot about.
Yeah, no, it's central to our practice at the Invisible Institute. In some ways, it's easy these days with the way the technology works and the media ecosystem works to have large audiences. Whether you're reaching the people whose situation and condition you're reporting in solidarity with, I really appreciate Ruby's framing. That is a different question, and it would be unfortunate if our over-promotion of number of views or number of people who engage obscures that reality that we have. Speaking of my organization, the Invisible Institute, I suspect it's true of others in this room. We write immersive, sort of ethnographically rich reporting about neighborhoods on the South Side, and we have a continuing problem of getting our work into the hands of the people in those neighborhoods. And I'm not offering an answer to that, but I think it's a fundamental problematic that is important to acknowledge and kind of not to talk past.
And you're raising a kind of an operational and logistical element of impact. And so if there's this incredible piece of journalism that reveals something that needs to be revealed, and maybe to use some of the phrasing that Ruby talked about, puts us on towards a solution even. But it isn't reaching the endpoint of the person who needs it the most, then it's short-circuited, and maybe we could even describe that as partially failed. And so is there another step that we need to be thinking about investing in more in terms of getting that ball over the goal line?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, we talk, it's sort of a family joke within the Invisible Institute about creating a media lab, the purpose of which is to get things into people's hands, on the street, because there's been this notion that technology solves these fundamental questions, and it doesn't. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, but that requires really prioritizing almost a one-on-one kind of engagement, right?
And it occurs to me that relying on technological solutions to solve the delivery problem can actually have a counterproductive effect. The algorithms behave in insidious and self-serving ways, not necessarily to the benefit of the people who need it the most. So it seems to be a foolhardy to hand that job over to the bots.
Right. And so I guess what I'm arguing for is acknowledging some fundamental issues we have not solved. We talk about the sort of larger media ecosystem, fake news, disinformation, but there's some fundamental issues close to home that those of us who do this kind of reporting really haven't solved and need to bring more energy, more sustained attention to.
Ruby, the Illinois Answers Project, one of its distinguishing characteristics is its focus on solutions journalism. Can you, for those in the room who may not be familiar with the term or may have a partial understanding of it, describe what this means and how this connects to impact?
Oh, certainly. So for us, solutions journalism, and it began a little bit over 10 years ago, but it means to rigorously investigate societal problems, looking at the evidence for them, the limitations and the insights that come up from those quote unquote solutions, or as we refer to them, responses. To a particular issue. We have a wonderful package today by our one and only Grace on 3 stories. Yes, the right clap for Grace, please, everybody. We have 3 such stories out today, kind of wrapping up her wonderful series on restraint chair use within the Illinois County jails, looking at how other states, how county jails within other states use or don't use restraint chairs to alleviate some of the very serious risks of harming folks either physically or mentally and emotionally, or if not all 3. That kind of work for me helps us to reframe some things. Sometimes if it's a problem that we all kind of know exists, if there are ways in which we can inform communities about steps that can be taken or could be applied to their own communities, to me that is another form of impact, absolutely. That we may be able to say, well, this is the problem, because oftentimes within our communities, people may know what the problem is. They may not be as aware of the breadth, depth, and scope of the entire problem. So it is valid for us to talk about problems and to put numbers and context to problems. But it is also within our power and ability, and I think responsibility, that if there are responses to those problems that either the government is trying or community organizations are trying, that we, as rigorously as we tell the problem, that we tell about the potential response to that problem, so that people may be well informed. It can go before their city council or their state legislature or whoever, and get perhaps some sort of response to their problem. Did that make sense?
And I'll remind, if anybody would like to have a question or make a statement along the way, please find Grace, who's story just came out today, and series just wrapped up. Yes, in these cases of solutions, this requires an extra whole muscle group of our journalism skills. And Jamie, I think I would categorize a lot of what Invisible has done as being oriented toward solutions as well, or at least pointing in that direction. How do we develop those skills and deliver that impact when journalism's reward system and the business reward system is looking at shorter term measurements of success?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. I think that the history and our experience with police reform in Chicago, which in significant ways was not completely driven by journalism, but journalism played a significant role in it over the last decade, is kind of instructive, because a lot of stuff happened, and there were some significant enduring victories. I mean, we now have expectations of transparency that were unthinkable 10 years ago, and now we take for granted. Everybody does. That's significant. But with all of the commissions and the building out of oversight infrastructure and changes in policy, I would venture to ask whether the lived experience of those most affected by abusive policing has changed in meaningful ways. And so I think of it as like surface turbulence, on the surface of water, when there are deeper movements and tendencies below. And I think we often celebrate the surface turbulence and don't confront the difficult question of, have the underlying conditions that give rise to the harms that we report on been changed by our reporting? And I don't say that in a downbeat way. I say it in a journalistically ambitious way, because if it's the case that they haven't been affected by, work that's been celebrated and esteemed and given awards, well, that's diagnostically really important and interesting, and we should be thinking about it and should inform our practice. So, I think being realistic and somewhat skeptical about metrics, so-called, and recognizing just the structural reality that in a sort of resource-poor enterprise, we're all competing for resources and almost helplessly inclined to a kind of resume padding and over arguing impact. What I want to suggest is that there's the possibility that we're missing some stories, that we're not asking the right questions because we're too satisfied with the notion that so-and-so got fired or a commission was established or a policy changed, but did the underlying realities change? And did the underlying conditions that gave rise to the harms change? And so to go back to the policing history in Chicago, it seems to me that what people aspired to in the sort of post-Laquan McDonald moment and for a long time was really a paradigm shift in how we think about public safety. What they got was some fixes bolted on to a fundamentally dysfunctional machinery. And
That wasn't itself fundamentally changed.
that wasn't fundamentally changed in itself.
And so the job's not nearly complete in that analysis. We'll come back to what a more complete job might look like and what signs you may see of that as a possibility here in a little bit. And probably about 5 minutes from now, there is a question. This person here,
This person,
whose name is,
Jean Martineau.
and who will stand up for us, please.
I'll scare everybody.
No.
No, I was just wondering when you commented on transparency within the police department, it seems those of us who just read the news and are not part of gathering it, it seems there's an awful lot of FOIs that are ignored for days and weeks and months. What can be done about that?
Yeah, no, I think we've achieved significant breakthroughs in principle, in terms of information that belongs to the public. I think the FOIA machinery is a joke. I think it's frustrating for everybody. I think, and we've made this argument that, say, with respect to investigations of allegations of police misconduct, just make it public. Don't require people have
In
to.
other words, that's the default setting.
But people have to go through this kind of Rube Goldberg contraption of FOIA. So the image that I've used in that connection is what we've achieved through FOIA reform is everybody's got a library card. And everybody can take a few things out of the library with some significant effort. Why not just throw the doors of the library open? This information belongs to the public. It should be made readily available to them.
And it seems to me that the current system not only lacks a backstop of accountability and has all sorts of ways to arbitrarily deny a FOIA request, but also is a reinforcing discriminatory loop that it means it's accessible only to those who have the wherewithal, the knowledge, the experience, the money, the fortitude to fight for it and fight again when it's denied. And now I'm the one giving the answer. So maybe I should leave it to you. But am I right in this assumption?
It helps if they know you're going to sue them.
It really does. It does.
Right.
That's true. It does.
And one of the measures, as we're talking about how are we assessing? We have another.
Oh, a question.
Another question.
Carol Wyant, and I'm asking, does significant citizen protest, having a major protest, really make a difference at the underlying level as well as on the immediate level?
So if I understand the comment or the question, yes, I think that the only meaningful change that I've seen in my professional career has come less directly from journalists than from citizens who became mobilized with some provocation from the journalism, some prompt from the journalism. That's where the change comes, no question. And I think it's an important distinction.
And while we're finding our next question here in the front, as a follow-up, is part of your question about the power of a single person and the... No.
No, that is not.
Well, I'll ask it then, fine.
No, it was really, certainly journalism is huge. I didn't get the first two words. Journalism is huge in alerting citizens to the problem. But it only seems that mass protest makes a difference. Maybe an individual backed up by significant journalism could make a difference, but it's less likely, I think.
I agree.
So my name is Sherry Runner, but my question is about mis and disinformation. And so you said that it helps if they think you're going to sue, but oftentimes mis and disinformation is made with the intent that you will sue and lose because it's just skirting the truth, or there's some thread or bead of truth, and so that's become the norm now in terms of determining what people will say, and they will say anything.
We were talking about this a bit prior to the panel because in the vein of the importance of media literacy. So certainly if there's an issue with misinformation or disinformation, for FOIAs especially, when we're talking about governmental agencies, those are the people we're talking about suing. Your average pink slime kind of thing, there would be no point, I don't think necessarily, well, I guess you could, in suing them. But I think with that, it is a very strong lack of, and a very alarming lack of the ability to understand news, facts, where you get those facts, what facts you choose to believe, how to kind of rigorously on your own evaluate a statement as either true or not true or somewhat true, or fact-based, like on your own. So it is, those things are much bigger than I think I can deal with.
I don't know if it's directly responsive, Sherry, but I think your comment touches on something essential about local reporting. I can't even imagine a way of fixing the larger media ecosphere at the moment. But in terms of local reporting, I think the aspiration and the possibility is to create a common evidentiary basis that allows people to argue about things, to have necessary conversations and arguments with each other. But it starts by saying, that's a chair. That's a chair. If you want to contest my statement that that's a chair, you actually have to come down here and demonstrate that it's not a chair. And I think there's a sort of almost, I don't want to use a big word, but epistemological project of building out from the ground a set of common understandings in communities in particular places. And I think this relates to something that was touched on a little bit by Ruby, which is if we think less about audience and more about public in the sense of democratic theory, a public, a polity, people who are engaged with each other, argue with each other, it sort of clarifies something about the role of journalism. If we can keep bringing the news that that's a chair, and people can have the arguments they need to have with each other about those, local issues, we can begin to build from the ground up.
You think it's still possible?
I think it's still possible. I mean, I think,
hope so.
But I think, I think BGA does this. I think we do it. We aspire to do it. We report on intensely local phenomena in a way that has national resonance. It's published nationally, it's part of a national conversation, but it's really, really grounded. When we began the work of the Invisible Institute, it began years ago with something we published from a vacant unit in public housing called The View from the Ground. That remains our ethos. And there's a power in that. There's a power in recruiting observable reality, not just on behalf of journalism, but on behalf of the members of different and multiple communities. And I think we need to kind of sort of reimagine what that work is in a hallucinatory time.
You've used some high score words in Scrabble, by the way. Epistemological, hallucinatory.
I have others.
Yeah, I have no doubt you do. In reply to or just thinking about the shared set of facts. A.G. Sulzberger wrote in the New York Times this week a piece, I think the title was "A Free People Need a Free Press," and he was doing an opus on the problems that the press faces coming from every angle and at tides that we've never seen before. And in this, he argued something like the point that you're making right now, that one of the essential services that journalism does for democracy comes way before all the analysis and what we're kind of, the results that we're getting, the impact that we're talking about, and that is the gathering, organizing, and verification of basic facts. And I never thought I would read the publisher of the New York Times taking a victory lap for that, but it comes down to this moment in time that we're on about it's hard to have a real conversation and a real discussion and debate if we spend some large percentage of the time arguing whether that's a chair or not. And so what does that do to our ability to have the impact that we set out to do when there are forces arrayed designed to filibuster the basic underlying facts, and I believe have an agenda to prevent the impact you may be working towards of happening?
I think to Jamie's point, it answers that question well, because if we are writing about things that impact local communities, then we do know that these things are actually impacting, they're actually happening in these communities. The folks can verify it. They see it, they smell it, they touch it, they know it. They knew it before we showed up to cover it. So I think that goes well to what Jamie was saying, and he can articulate it much better than I, about the importance of what we do locally. And how we do locally. I think these are some extraordinarily interesting times in what is truth, and if there is an objective truth, and if everything is relative. There are certain things, if your trash is not being picked up, it is not relative.
Right.
Okay.
Right, or if your basement's
Right,
flooding.
or whatever, your basement's flooding, all those things, those are not, those are factual, concrete things that people can hold on to.
Right.
Right. And I think that the what's suggested to me by this exchange is that there's also a function for journalists that we should be entertaining beyond the information gathering and the reporting, which is a convening function. Not just, through it in prisons and penitentiaries, they have a term for throwing a line. You want to communicate with somebody, you throw a line to like from an upper tier down, and I feel like we're kind of like that. We throw out a line and hope that it's gonna land. And I think if journalists thought, especially entities like BGA, the Invisible Institute, a number of others in Chicago, that are locally grounded and have some relationship to their audience. If we thought more about, and this is an example right now, but thought more about what it would mean to convene the conversation in the situation about that being a chair, and really putting some resources behind that, not as self-promotion, not as community engagement, and all these sort of buzzwords, but as a really fundamental journalistic function of not simply assuming that the conversation that we aspire to will occur because we've published something, but putting some energy and creativity into creating the conditions for that conversation to happen. Not manipulating it, not determining it, but creating the space for it.
And I want to come back to explore that a little bit more, but Crystal's hand is up over here.
I do have a question. Well, you guys have talked a lot about how journalism impacts the world outside of the newsroom, but I'm curious about how the makeup of who is in power inside the newsroom impacts or influences the conversation about impact and that kind of engagement that you were just talking about.
Sure.
Ruby, you've worked in and led newsrooms from here till Kingdom Come. What do you say to that?
I do believe that there is, to Crystal's question, there certainly is a dynamic that occurs when a newsroom is allowed to run itself, when it has a certain amount of independence and trust, when the leadership, whether it's me or anyone else, when I put my full trust and back the play of the people who I work with, I have never been disappointed. I may set certain parameters and say, okay, well, don't spend that much money. But certainly, I think that when journalism flows, and I was a reporter a lot longer than I was an editor, so I may be biased in this. When journalism flows from the closest to the ground or the closest to the source, the better it is. And so if that is that is my philosophy in running a newsroom, and if we're allowed to do that, then yeah, I do believe absolutely that it can either positively or negatively impact a newsroom and its ability.
And Mackenzie, we also have another question over here.
Where are you?
Just to your left.
She's right there.
Very good.
Sorry, I picked the worst seat in the house for this. Hello, I'm Carlos. I'm also going to ask a big question with no solution, really, but it's something that's been on my mind. And it's around this question of impact. I think right now we are in a very critical juncture where there is a war on reading and knowledge and just, automation taking away, incentivizing college students not to read and just have their papers written by AI and all this. In underlying all that, I think, is a crisis of literacy. I think 1 in 4 adults in Cook County are functionally illiterate. And it's something that I've been thinking about my work as to how to present it in the most accessible way, but I'm thinking broader, like I'm hoping to hear from you, is what role do you think journalists, journalism, news organizations should play in this attack on reading? Should we get off the sidelines and be more politically active? Should we incorporate ourselves in schools a lot more and really emphasizing the need for literacy campaigns? I just feels like we are swimming against a current that's only getting stronger, and 20 years from now, I don't know what any of this will look like. So.
Years ago, I'm from Detroit originally, and both Detroit papers had newspapers in education, which was a literacy component. We went into schools to talk about what we did for a living. There were actual newspapers that were printed as appropriate for
Newspaper in education
yes,
campaign.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So years ago, that was a significant part of it. Actually, I have a son, he's 35. It is how he began to read. It wasn't my stories. No, it was those little things with those cute little stories that, he really, So that was a thing. I think it would be wonderful if we could get back to that. I don't know if there would be the resources. I don't think, I wish we could. I think we should.
Who here ever came across the Weekly Reader in school? It's a lot of hands, isn't it?
Oh, look
or
at
a
that.
Highlights magazine.
Oh, I still get that from my grandkids.
What role did those play for media literacy for young people? I would guess a pretty substantial one. Ruby, while we have you, have you answered Carlos's question as much as you want to?
I don't think I can really answer his question.
Yeah, I'm feeling his question.
What about? I do want to come back to Ruby here in a minute, but Jamie, there's a particular element of Carlos's question which you might have something to say about, which is the element of the journalist becoming an involved party. And there was a tide of advocacy and taking a position and doing something about it. And this would not be a foreign concept to you.
No, no, not foreign. My stance has always been, and I came up, outside of conventional newsrooms, right? So, lucky me. But my stance has always been that caring deeply about an issue, a community, a place, was not inconsistent with doing rigorous journalism.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I would even acknowledge that there might be some limitations to that orientation, right? But in my mind, they pale next to the limitations of the conceit that you are somehow being objective.
Right.
And I would make a distinction between objectivity and truth. But I don't see caring and forming human attachments as a liability.
Yeah, and this is, there's first applause line. That's a statement that I think sits differently with people over time and might have been shouted down by many people at a point in time. And maybe there are still some who would have reason to do, but you've just tapped into a fundamental evolution that's happening in journalism in different places, in different ways, and at different levels, but not zero practically anywhere.
Yeah, and I think I'm actually an example of that. So, early in my career, I was doing, I think, essentially the same work I'm doing now, and was dismissed as an advocate and not really a journalist and this and that. Now, all these years later, doing, I think, precisely the same kind of work. If anything, I'm overesteemed for the work, which I take to be less about me and more about the field. Some change in the field.
You might have been leading a trend that is catching up.
I don't think I led it. I think I'm just like, the canary in the mine or whatever the appropriate image would be.
I'll say you were leading it. I know you don't want to say that, but Ruby, you have a couple more questions here. You have a system at the Illinois Answers Project. You have something called an impact tracker. Let's come back to that. That's the core idea, and we've been talking about impact of journalism in many different ways here. You keep track. That's what an impact tracker does. And what is the system for doing that? How does that thing work? What are the qualitative and quantitative components to it? What are its limitations? And where does it help you do your best work?
Well, our impact tracker was started previous to my joining the Illinois Answers Project and the BGA. But we track impact along, I believe it's about 12 key metrics. And they can include, mentions in a different media outlet. They can include if there's some legal or a city council action or some sort of a legislative action. They can include whether a person speaks about them in a public forum. They are both for us and the policy team, although we are obviously separate from our policy brethren. And so for us, it is a way for us to, in some ways, gauge whether how our work is being seen, how our work is being engaged with, and where and through which channels it is most likely hitting. And so then conversely, where it may not be, where we might be able to where we might be able to have a little bit more quote unquote impact, if we were to do a follow-up story, or if we were to share it differently on social media, if we were to reconsider the headlines or what have you, if we were to share it differently, if we were to convene, as Jamie talks about, a community conversation, it allows us to be able to think about if we've achieved all that we can achieve with a particular amount of coverage, or if there are still avenues to pursue.
It sounds like a pretty handy device, honestly. I mean, and maybe it's a lot to keep track of, but how do you use that for not just end of the year analysis of how, did we really have the impact that we wanted, but 1 week to the next, 1 day to the next?
I will be honest with you, in my short tenure, we've never done an end of the year analysis.
Oh. Well, let's do one.
Yeah, we should do. Maybe. We should. And so I will say that our small and mighty team of the Illinois Answers Project, including our other two editors, we track, but probably not as deeply and as well as I should.
Can I add a complication?
Yes, you can.
Which is, I've been at this for a long time, and I think I've come to regard impact or influence as being a kind of mysterious phenomena, as opposed to something that's readily quantifiable and readily measured. I have people occasionally come up to me and say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I read this thing that you wrote or heard it, and it really had this significant, sometimes really dramatic impact. That's a glimpse of a world out there of, and I think it's what's sort of magical about writing and about journalism, is you really don't know. You know, you aspire to reach people, you aspire to move them, you aspire to break through to their moral imaginations. Mostly you don't know whether you did or not. And one way of reading that is to say, well, you know, it's kind of futile and you're ineffectual. But I think there's this, and I think it's good to be sort of humble and modest in your estimation of those things. But there's this mysterious dimension. I think it's easier maybe for people to relate to as readers than as producers of journalism. Your own experience of things that altered your sense of the world or became important reference points, that actually it was an article or a book or, you know, a documentary film. So I think when we talk about impact, it's fine to look at all these different kinds of measures, but I would urge you to hold on to a sense of what a mysterious enterprise we're engaged in.
And that is why initially you and I began to have conversations, as well as Mackenzie, because I struggle with the measurements of impact as the only ways to measure impact. And so that's how the conversation kind of got started, because we do have an impact tracker, and there are things that are important for us to be able to talk about with potential funders and our current funders as we share what a wonderful investment that we are and all the wonderful work that we do.
Placed.
Yes.
Nicely done. Jamie, this mysterious dynamic that you described, this ephemeral, this magical presence that we sometimes feel, I think any of us who've done impactful journalism have felt that. And maybe it's been a fleeting feeling, but we've known it when we felt it. Thank you for calling that out. Now, I want to talk about a point, and maybe this will be our final question here, that you've spoken and written about, and that is there's a higher plane still, even than getting laws changed or people sprung out of wrongful imprisonment or reading rates being risen or health outcomes being made more favorable, and that is the enablement of a society to discuss and tackle its problems, and the role that journalism plays to convene and equip those people. Tell us how that feels like impact to you.
I think it's the name of the game. I mean, I think it's essentially what our role was conceived to be in the constitutional scheme. It's massively under assault at the moment, and the institutions we rely on are largely hollowed out. But that was referred to in the introduction. You know, I've written and thought a great deal over the years about freedom of speech from a legal perspective as well as a practitioner. And I think one of the things that has often made it's an interesting contrast, because I have great appreciation for the First Amendment tradition, the legal infrastructure that's been built, all these fine distinctions and nuances that are in the law. But sometimes I think there's the danger of thinking that we're free because we have the First Amendment, and which means that if we don't have the First Amendment, we're not free. And there's a striking contrast when you read, public intellectuals in Latin America, Central Europe, South Africa, who have dealt with repressive regimes. It's that the freedom to speak, the freedom to assemble, the freedom to have conversations, it becomes palpable, becomes a quality of people's humanness, not of a legal apparatus. It becomes this sort of fundamental thing. I think we're within reach of being able to have some of those perceptions in our present circumstances. And what we do with that is another question. But I think the notion that we're really talking about an assault on our full humanity, our ability to fully inhabit the world and be who we are and manifest who we are. So I don't know if that's really responsive to your question. It's more responsive to the moment, but I do think that we're being brought down to fundamentals. And so how we address, people can worry about the Democratic Party and who's going to run for president and the midterms and all of that. But I think there's also a really urgent and immediate agenda, which has to do with how we address ourselves to each other, to our neighbors, and in building those conversations. And with a sense that this is really about our full humanity and not about, a set of institutions or legal rules. Those things matter, but we're down to fundamentals right now. And we have an opportunity, I think, of a kind of renewal and recovery, even in very, very adverse circumstances.
Very good. Well, listen, the best stories, the ones we want to read the most, have those invigorating leads, and the best movies are the ones leaving us wanting a sequel. And I think that final thrust you gave us there, Jamie, leaves us wanting more. I'm afraid we're out of time. So would you please join me in thanking Ruby Bailey and Jamie Kalven for their time and expertise today.
Thank you. Okay, wait. Who picked this chair? Y'all know Oh my God. Okay.
There's no speaker, so I'm just going to yell. Thank you all for joining us for this part of the celebration tonight. If you could all join us on the second floor. Next, we'll have the next part of our program. Thank you.
Oh, what you need more pictures? Okay.